Here with Paul Geremia at Space in Evanston. Paul, welcome. Great to have you back here.
Well, thank you. It's good to be here again.
All right. So it's been, what, 40 years plus in the blues?
Yeah, over 40 years, they tell me.
Yeah. And you've pretty much been on the road?
Well, when I started out, I didn't have a car. You know, I have a car. But I have had a car most of the time.
Yeah.
And the car I've got now, knock on wood, is
That's Formica.
well, that's for knock on Formica, is continually saving my butt.
Yeah.
It's a good car, reliable car.
Right.
I hope it stays that way.
So you started out in late 60s?
Well, I started actually making my living just from playing music, I guess, in '66 when I dropped out of college,
Uh-huh.
and which is something I probably should have done years before I did it.
Yeah.
I was just killing time.
What drew you to the blues?
I was only playing the guitar in college anyway. I wasn't doing any studying, you know.
It sounds like me. What drew you to the blues, Paul?
Well, I really don't know. I can't say. It was just a. I mean, you know, why do you get attracted to one woman and not another woman? You know, I mean, you can't really. It's just a chemistry, mental. It's a mental process. It gave me a sense of being connected to something that was much bigger than me, but that I could relate to.
Yeah.
You know, I guess that's one way of putting
Sure.
it. And
Do you remember some of the first artists and records that really turned your head? And
oh,
opened your
absolutely.
eyes?
I distinctly remember one time my father had a recording of Louis Armstrong's Hot Five doing St. Louis Blues, which has never been and still isn't my favorite song at all. It's not even one of my favorite songs, really. But what Louis Armstrong's Hot Five did with anything they did, it can make it sound appealing, and they really took off on that number. And Louis Armstrong's high note trumpet stuff really got to me, and his singing. He was a great blues singer, and at that time I wasn't even playing guitar. I was just playing harmonica. And I thought, gee, wouldn't it be great if I could someday play the harmonica like Louis Armstrong plays the cornet, you know? But I don't think that'll ever happen. But it's something to shoot for, you know?
Yeah. Who were some of the first blues guitar players that really turned you on?
The very first one I think I remember was Mississippi John Hurt, who I heard in 1963. At a Topical Songs workshop at the Newport Folk Festival, hosted by Pete Seeger, who introduced John Hurt, as well as Bob Dylan, Phil Oakes, Peter Lafarge. I think Tom Paxton was there too. I can't remember who else was there, but John Hurt really blew my mind.
Yeah.
I mean, the other people were all great too,
Right.
but John Hurt was the one that really stuck with me. It really knocked me out because I'd never seen someone perform playing fingerstyle guitar, and he didn't have a record out at the time, and the only finger picking that I'd heard, I think around that time, was occasional folk singers like Jack Elliott. Ramblin' Jack Elliott had a great recording of Railroad Bill, which I think he learned from Etta Baker, and that was on a record that I owned, and I practically wore that cut out, listening to him play Railroad Bill over and over again. And Also, there was a friend of mine, a guy who became a friend of mine, and I'm still friends with him. He lives in Colorado now. His name is August Hansen. We knew him as Augie, and he was from an area not far from where I live, but we never met till we were both at school together at the University of Rhode Island together. I was an agriculture major. Augie was an engineering major. A really smart guy, and could really play the guitar,
Mm-hmm.
fingerstyle.
Mm-hmm.
And used to let me sit and watch him play.
Mm-hmm.
And I learned a lot from. I must have learned a lot from watching him play because he was the only person I knew that could do it. And after supper at night, I would stop by his room if I could hear him play and go on in. He'd let me sit there and watch him play. And then I started, figuring things out for myself.
Mm-hmm.
It took a long time for me to figure out how to play fingerstyle guitar, but I finally figured it out enough so that I could get by.
Mm-hmm. So you were pretty much headed in the acoustic fingerstyle direction. Did you ever have any temptations, or did you ever play much electric blues guitar?
No, but one of the other first people who I heard that affected me a lot was Tim Hardin. I caught him in '63, the winter of '63, at a club, at a coffee house in Cambridge. And he really impressed me. He was a great singer,
Mm-hmm.
as well as a really accomplished guitar player, and predominantly playing blues at
Mm-hmm.
that time.
Mm-hmm.
He was playing traditional stuff. He wasn't doing his own material at that time, but he became well known for his songwriting over the years.
Uh-huh. There's a lot of talk about the blues revival that happened in the '60s around that time. where
'64.
Okay.
That was the big year.
That was the big year where people like John Hurt and Skip James and Son House
Right.
and got rediscovered.
Right.
And you were probably a witness to a lot of that.
Yeah. Well, the '64 was the big year. I got to go to the Newport Folk Festival that year. I made sure that I wasn't going to work that weekend because in '63 I had to work and I could only go there in the afternoon on Sunday, when everything was almost all over, And I still didn't have a car, but in '64, a friend of mine gave me a ride over from South County on a motorbike. We took the ferry from Jane. That's before they had the bridge made. And I got there Saturday morning and made sure I found a spot where they were going to have a seat where they were going to have that workshop, a place to sit on the ground in front of that stage. And boy, I couldn't believe my ears. Skip James, Son House didn't play at that workshop. He was sick that day, but he was at the festival.
Mm-hmm.
But they had Robert Pete Williams.
Mm-hmm.
No, he was you don't hear much about
No.
him anymore. He was pretty amazing.
Yeah.
And Sleepy John Estes and Yank Rachel. And just everybody.
And did you get to know a lot of these guys over the years?
I did get to know Sleepy John and Yank Rachel, especially Yank, because they were playing a coffee house in Providence, Rhode Island that winter. They got kind of stranded in a snowstorm, and they played there for a whole week, and I managed to get to that club every night.
Yeah.
And I had a little mandolin that I'd bought from Taj Mahal when he was moving to the West Coast. I think I paid like $15 for it. It was a piece of junk made in Korea, and it was so bad. I brought it down because Yank didn't have his mandolin with him, and I remember hearing him on record with a mandolin.
Yeah.
I really wanted to hear some blues mandolin, which I love the sound of that blues mandolin style of his. And I brought this mandolin down, and the strings, the action was so bad and everything, he had to put matchsticks between the strings to keep him from getting tangled up. But he played the hell out of it.
Yeah. And did you get to see Son House, get to know Son House?
Not until a few years later.
Mm-hmm.
Dick Waterman, I met Dick Waterman at the same club the Sleepy John and Yank were playing at. A couple of years later, he'd come down to that coffee house to smooth over an argument, a beef that the woman who owned the club had concerning Big Joe Williams being obstreperous with her. I think he might have pinched her or something, you know. Anyway, she was bitching and moaning about Big Joe, and Waterman had booked her into that coffee house, and so he came down to talk to her and smooth things over, you know. And I was playing that night when he was there, and he said, he told me who he was and said if I'm ever up in Cambridge, you know, get in touch with him, you know. He said if I need a place to stay, he had a spare room. That was music to my ears because at that time I think I was still living at my parents' out in Johnston, and they didn't know what the hell I was doing, you know. They didn't know. It didn't make any sense to them, you know.
Sure.
But they did appreciate music, but they didn't know. And they just couldn't understand the fact that I was not interested in staying in college and wanted to play the guitar.
Right.
Anyway, when I finally did drop out of school, I went to Cambridge and got a room in a rooming house for $14 a week up around Porter Square, and started just playing coffee houses, you know. And I was already gigging at those places and taking the train up from Providence and taking the MTA to get to the places where the coffee houses were, Harvard Square or Charles Street, Boston.
Mm-hmm.
And anyway, I was landing some gigs, and all I needed was $14 a week to pay for that room, and then whatever else was gravy.
Yeah.
And so I stayed there, kept doing it, you know.
Yeah.
And eventually I bought a car, and I never had to ask my parents for any money. I think that was one of the things that ingratiated them to what I was doing.
Yeah.
I never really wanted to borrow money from anybody. I still don't like to borrow money, and I don't do it unless I'm desperate. But